Hello and welcome to this special series of webinars that is being organized by the Department of Media Science of the Heritage Academy. As you all are aware, the entire planet is going through extremely difficult times and a lot of our regular activities are facing challenges of an uncertain future. But as they say, this too shall pass. We, the students of Heritage Academy, thrive with that optimism and look forward to plan and build our academic careers in the post-COVID times with our continuous support and guidance of our academic institution. In our first webinar of the series, we have with us an eminent guest, Ms. Tanushree Bhowmik, who's the Program Manager of the Australian High Commission in India and an expert in the development sector. He has worked in the United Nations Development Program for a decade and has also worked very closely with the Indian media. We are extremely happy to have her here with us. We sincerely thank Mr. Pradeep Agarwal, CEO of the Heritage Group of Institutions, for allowing the students the opportunity to interact with the industry leaders and experts. I now request the Principal of the Heritage Academy, Professor Gaur Banerjee, to welcome our guest. I shall also request the Dean of Department of Media Science to say a few words before we start the session with Ms. Tanushree Bhowmik and our Professor Arjun Chatterjee. Over to you, Principal, sir.
Good evening. At the outset, I am, as the principal of the Heritage Academy, would like to welcome our distinguished guest speaker, Tanushree Bhowmik, in today's webinar on media opportunities in development sector, organized by Vibrant Media Science Department, headed by Professor Dr. Madhupa Bakshi. Ms. Bhowmik is the program manager with the Australian High Commission in India, based in New Delhi. She is an expert in development sector with vast experience of working with international organizations such as UNDP, several ministries of Government of India, Australian Embassy, and so on and so forth. She is also having extensive experience in working with Indian media industries. I feel privileged to welcome our Chief Executive Officer, Kalyan Bharati Trust, Sri Pradeep Kumar Agarwal, who is always a source of inspiration, support, and encouragement. Sir, without your support and encouragement, such eventful media science could have never been seen. Also like to welcome Director Kalyan Bharati Trust, Mr. Praveen Roy, Advisor, Heritage Business School, Professor K.K. Chaudhary, and other distinguished guests, members of faculty, and my beloved students in the webinar. In my address, I always say a few words on the Heritage Academy. It was set up in 2007 by Kalyan Bharati Trust, a charitable trust created by 22 like-minded industrialists who wanted to have a mission in their mind to have an institution of excellence in the eastern part of the country. When it was set up in 2007, we had only two departments, BBA and BCA, with meager intake of 60 each in both the department, taking the students' total strength to only 120. Over a period of time, gradual increase in intake in BBA and BCA and introduction of prestigious Media Science Department 2016, our student strength rose to 1,000 plus. Madam, our students are doing exceedingly well, not only in academics, but also in career progressions. What we want to mean is that they not only do come out with good results, lot of the students of BBA, BCA, and media science are coming out as university toppers. Our students of BCA and masters in media science are getting prestigious job opportunities and with handsome package. I am likely to mention one thing more. Our first batch of masters in media science, we had a rank university bronze medal holder, and that makes us proud. I am confident that Tanushree will enlighten fresh young minds in whom we see the future of vibrant India. Ma'am, students are eagerly waiting to listen to you. Thank you all. God bless. Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir, for being always a support from the Media Science Department, and we look forward to your continued support, without which we would not have gained so much traction and scale. Welcome, Tanushree. We have guests all coming all throughout the year. Uh, Otherwise, during non-pandemic times, we have had numerous guests, and we would love to host you once this is over in our campus. Development communication is of particular interest to our students. Some of them are already in NGOs, and as Steve and Mercote calls this emancipation communication, is about changing the social uh, inadequacies of the society, and how we can all work towards it. It offers a great scope of careers also. Some of them are graduating that are interested in working in that sector. So it would be a great opportunity for them. And I must also tell you, as Principal Sir was telling you, that we have a master's and we have an undergrad program. In the master's program, some of them get into academics, like he said. There's a bronze, we got a bronze, and then second batch we have a gold medal, and they have gone into education, and they also want to work into research in this area also. In our undergrad batch, the one that is graduating and the one that has already graduated, there are some of them already working in the social sector and using communication, obviously, to reach out to the different sects. So I'm sure we are all going to learn from you. Thank you so much for being to come. Yes, Arjun, please lead the conversation forward.
Thank you, Dr. Bhowmik. Uh, Before we begin, thank you, Principal Sir, as well. I mean, without your support, it wouldn't have been possible. And without much further ado, welcome, Tanushree. I hope Delhi is keeping you fine, even in these bad, terrible pandemic times. I've been discussing with my students that we used to live, and now we will live. So this is a watershed point in history, a remarkable point, and we are either fortunate or unfortunate to have witnessed this. I haven't seen the Second World War, neither have you, but I think this is more disastrous to the very existence, and that brings us to the moot point of today's discussion, which is development. And then, you have to talk about these fresh young minds and where they move on from here on. So I leave the floor to you and give you a cue as to explain the topic for today. Explain to them what development sector is and what that interference and the crossroads of the media industry is with that development sector.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Neha. It was a very generous introduction. And thank you, Professor Banerjee and Dr. Bakshi. Thanks a lot for the welcome. And of course, Arjun, for inviting me. I'm really happy to be interacting with you. And as you said, these are really challenging times. And I think more than challenging, they're very unprecedented for all of us. We are dealing with a very unprecedented sort of time. I guess, as they say famously that, tough times don't last, tough people do. So I'm sure we are going to, get over this and we'll come stronger on the other side. But because of the pandemic, I am aware that, most of us are confined to spaces. We are not moving around much, but I'm still extremely aware that, you've all agreed to spare an hour of your Friday evening. And thank you for that. And let's try to make it worthwhile since we all are here. You know that Neha has given an introduction of me, and you know that I work with the Australian High Commission as a program manager. But let me just give you a little more about what I have done so that it helps you to put into perspective why I am here. So, as you know, I'm currently with the Australian High Commission. I work as a program manager. Australia has a South Asia regional program on working on infrastructure, connectivity, and looking at all of it through a gender and social inclusion point of view. This is a program which is it's spread across 6 countries, which is India, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, Myanmar, and Sri Lanka. So that's where I currently am. But before I joined the Australian High Commission, I've spent about close to 10 years, a little more than 10 years within the UN system. I was with the United Nations Development Program and UNDP, and I have worked in UNDP in various capacities. So I've managed a program called the Small Grants Program, which was a very interesting program, where we worked with small NGOs and community-based organizations, and we were funding them to work on projects on biodiversity conservation, energy, climate change, and all of that. Then I worked in the core team for a while, looking at energy and climate change. And then I've managed 2 national level programs, one on demand side management of electricity in Odisha, Jharkhand, Bihar, and Chhattisgarh. And I've also managed a program on integrating biomass-based power plants into the grid. Now, I know that doesn't sound interesting at all, but trust me, it was more challenging than I can make, I've been able to, present it as. And before I joined the UN, I've spent 3 years working with the government of India. I have worked with the Ministry of Rural Development, and I have worked on monitoring and evaluation. So I'm basically a development economist, and my interest areas, I think, which is pretty clear by now, my interest areas are energy, especially renewable energy, infrastructure, energy infrastructure, and looking at all of it from a gender and a social inclusion point of view. And I specialize in monitoring and evaluation, resource-based management, and of course, impact assessments. Now, what that means is that in all the positions that I have held, especially in the UN and now, the work deals a lot with how we communicate and through what we communicate. That's key to the work that we do. But before I get into that, I think I would like to take you through what exactly is the development sector, because in my experience, and I'm not saying that it's the same for you, but in my experience, what happens is when we talk about development sector, most people just end up thinking it's the non-government organizations or the NGOs as they are commonly known. Now, the development sector is actually a lot more than that. It's a whole wide umbrella of organizations who work within that spectrum. I think what classifies the sector is not who works in it, but what are people working on. But the actors in the development sector are pretty vast. Now, it's not just NGOs, it is not just one kind of organizations, and it is not even a homogeneous field of work. And that's important for you to know. People get a little surprised when I say that the biggest development actor in a country, and especially in a country like ours, is actually the government. Through the schemes that they bring, to the work that they do, the government and its core machinery are actually the biggest development players. But it's not just that the core, it's the core government function. The government has think tanks that it operates on. For example, Niti Aayog. I'm sure all of you know of Niti Aayog, and Niti Aayog is a government think tank. Similarly, government-owned public sector units, PSUs, have CSR foundations, right? And they are a part of the development sector. For example, sorry?
I'm sorry. The CSR, the corporate social responsibilities. Yeah.
So, for example, you have a huge, foundation which is run by, say, the Rural Electricity Corporation, which is under the Ministry of Power. ONGC has a foundation which it runs. So a lot of these government PSUs have foundations which they run. Then you have a large set of actors, and with whom I have been associated with for a long period of time, whom we call the multilateral organizations. And these are the organizations which fall under the UN umbrella of organizations. So you have a UNDP, you have the UNICEF, you have WHO, or you have the multilateral banks like the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank. And these are the multilateral organizations. And then you have donor agencies. Now, donor agencies are also not just of one type. Now, there are traditional donors who are bilateral donors, like you have, I think, the most common examples of that, and the ones most recognizable perhaps are, the US has the USAID, which is a donor agency of the US government. Or, the British has the DFID, which is their donor agency. And these are traditional donors. Norwegians have a donor. The Swedish have a donor. And these are the funds that the government allocates, but they're not strictly under the bilateral funds like somebody like me works on. Now, that brings us to the another kind of funds that comes in, which are bilateral visions, which are not donor agency funds, which are part of the funds that we pledge as a part of the partnership or the discussion that goes on between two partner governments. And then you have private trusts and you have NGOs who also work as donor agencies. You have private sector organizations who have foundations who work as donor agencies. And I think a lot of you would be really familiar with. For example, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, right? They are a donor. Indian organizations also have donor. Reliance has a foundation. Tata Steel has a foundation. And then you have people like Microsoft and Intel who have pretty large foundations that they operate. And these are all donor agencies. They donate money to the development sector. And then we come to what we call broadly the civil society organizations. We have the non-government organizations, which are NGOs, large, small. You have large organizations, large NGOs like the WWF. You have large NGOs like the Oxfam. And then you have really small organizations. And then you have even smaller units, which we call the community-based organizations, various levels. You have advocacy groups, you have interest groups, you have civil liberty groups, and then you have what we call think tanks. And think tanks are, I think, one area which especially you people should be conversant with, and you should know about them, because think tanks are the one who deal with knowledge generation, knowledge management, research, and a lot of the communication that goes out there. We have famous think tanks in India, and India has quite a bit of very famous, incredible think tanks. You have somebody like the Observer Research Foundation, which is a national think tank, which has an office in Delhi and also operates in Kolkata. And then you have several other think tanks like this. Now, all of this makes it pretty complex. And what adds to the complexity is that none of us work on a single mission. And as I said, in the beginning, that probably what classifies development sector organizations more than, development sector more than the organization is the kind of work that we do. And the easiest way of understanding that is to look at it from the easiest way of wrapping it into a neat packet would be to look at what we call the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, right? All of these organizations, in some way or the other, affects these 17 Sustainable Development Goals. They can be the traditional goals of, say, poverty alleviation, hunger, health, education, or they can be the more new or the complex goals of, say, industrial development, of clean air, and also of things like, transparency and governance. But all these actors, in some way or the other, they affect these Sustainable Development Goals. Now, why I wanted to spend some time on this is because all of this complexity means three things. When you look at the work that we do, and when you look at the kind of organizations that we are, and it's important for, I think, especially outside stakeholders to understand this, and people who want to be a part of it, it is important to understand it for three reasons. One, which means that as the development sector continuously interacts with a very wide range of stakeholders. So someone like me in a day-to-day job would be interacting with government officials at different levels and of different foreign governments. And I would be interacting with think tanks, I would be interacting with NGOs, and during, say, a field visit, I would be interacting with direct beneficiaries whom the work's affecting. And that goes for most actors in the development sector. We constantly interact with a very wide range of stakeholders. And now, while we do it, the work's critical because the work affects quality of life and liberty. All the development work affects two things: quality of life and also civil liberty. And while we do this too, the money that we are using, more often than not, is public money. The development sector either uses taxpayers' money or it uses private equity, but which means that we are accountable to an external stakeholder, an external funder. And this is the reason why I wanted to spend a little bit of time telling you how this sector looks like, because accountability is that cornerstone where communication becomes the most critical component for us. What are we communicating? Whom are we communicating with? What points of time are we communicating with? Everything is critical for us to increase that accountability. I think as someone who has been here for more than a decade and a half, there are two things which is important. One is that we constantly strive to hold ourselves to higher standards of accountability. And it is also important for outside stakeholders to demand higher standards of accountability. And what is it that enables it? It is communication that we do that enables that, right? And this is why most development sector organizations invest some bit of their resources and time in actors or agents who are involved in communication, whether it's internal or whether it's external. Now, do you want me to pause a bit here, Arjun, or do you?
That's fine. I think, pardon me for interrupting as well. I think they have a fair enough idea as of now what development sector is all about. It was brilliant for you to say that it's not is equal to NGOs. It's far beyond that. And now that we know the different verticals, I would rather like you to address, I mean, there are fantastic students from undergrads first year to postgrads final year. So this is a bunch of people who are between 18 and 23. And, citing our own examples, how important is it for them to prepare in a way that they can take that plunge, initially obviously as a trainee, into these different sectors? What are the key criteria that are required for them to build on? How much of reading, particularly on the skill development part of it? And then probably in the later stage, I'll talk about a few opportunities, scholarships, and I'll ask you to elaborate on that. And which are the possible areas that a media student can walk into? Because right now, I'm pretty sure they're confused, they're thinking a lot, and they need to understand which is the way forward.
I'm going to start from the end.
Yeah.
Let me begin by saying that, what kind of opportunities or what is it that exists in the development sector for somebody who's studying media or communications? Now, I'm very aware that, we are a bit of a black box, because often the terms that we tend to use can throw people off the gear, right? You would seldom find a development sector organization advertising for a media manager. That doesn't usually come across. We use terms which are pretty unique to us, and that throws people off gear. I'm very aware of that, and I'm guilty.
It's intentional, isn't it?
I think it's not just intentional.
Sorry.
It is also, it's who we are. It's like it's like a financial manager would use terms which you and I would find difficult to understand, right? I mean, I have worked with social media managers who use terms which I can't understand for adults, but that's who we are. And I think that's why this communication is also important. So let me start with, what kind of opportunities exist. As I told you, there's a whole range of organizations or actors in this, who are involved. And the larger, the bigger the player, the more critical is the communication they do, and the more emphasis that they would lay on branding, and the more control that they would like to have over the communication that's going out there, right? Which means when you look at, and when I say large, it is not just in terms of not just in terms of geographical footprint or the money. It is also in terms of what kind of bargaining power they bring in, right? So if you're looking at, say, a foreign mission like a high commission or an embassy, if you're looking at donor agencies, if you're looking at UN organizations who can bring in large and small money, but have pretty much a very strong foothold in terms of their bargaining power, right? And they hold on to it by maintaining very strict control over their communications, right? Then you have larger NGOs like you have an Oxfam, you have a CARE, and these are the places where you would be more or less sure to find an internal communication team, right? There would be, most of us would have an internal team that helps us with our internal communication, external communication, and in certain cases also with media interaction, right? And that's a good starting point. Now let me give you an example. So say where I work today, our communication team consists of people who look after our, social media interactions, who look after our, the stories that go out to the press. And then we also have someone who looks after our interaction and the networking with the media at large, right? And most foreign missions would operate that way. But now, if you look at somebody like a UN, if I look at my UNDP experience, then a larger team is reserved for the communication that is of our work to an external stakeholder, right? And so UNDP or a UN organization classically would have people who would manage their social media, manage the website, but the nature of interaction is to take the work that we are doing to outside, right? And not necessarily looking at somebody who can manage media for them or media interactions. So that, so that's what that's how broadly these organizations operate. The smaller the organizations are, the chances that they might not have an internal media team, right? But that doesn't mean they don't work with communications. So one opportunity that definitely exists is when you're looking at these large organizations, you're looking at internal opportunities within them, and you can find your interest areas. Like, is your interest area in working alongside media? Do you enjoy writing stories? Do you enjoy, going to field and, bringing out those stories? That depends on your interest area, what do you want to pick up, and accordingly, what organizations you want to take. But most of these organizations also tend to work in some form or the other with external communication agencies. They might not have their own reporting teams. So you might be working with an external, a communication consultancy kind of an organization who helps these organizations tell their stories, right? So that's another way how the development sector engages with communication. One is through their internal teams, one is through engaging, outsourcing it to another entity which specializes in that, right? And then there's a third point of interaction that we have, where we ourselves interact with, or we are approached by traditional print media, audiovisual media, or social media who have an interest in development stories. And then, we communicate. So you can be in any of these three, points, and you can be interacting with the development sector. And that also tells you what are the points of interactions that we have. Now, since you're students, and I'm sure some of you might like to get into the development sector, I certainly hope you do. Internal teams, mostly of UN, high commissions, the selections are rigorous, right?
Before you
Most of
proceed,
them,
Tanushree, I'm sorry for
Sure.
barging in. I mean, this
No,
is
that's fine.
yeah. I want you to spend the next 5 minutes on talking about the idea that you're just sharing with us. What is required of a student, and how rigorous the process is, what kind of preparation one should have, and what are the possible websites or key areas where they can go into and look.
So, as I said, you're looking at larger organizations, and as I said, I certainly hope some of you do aspire to be part of it. The process itself, the entry process itself is rigorous, but when you make up, if you at all make up your mind to be part of development sector communications, I would like to put it out there that there's a different kind of rigor involved in it, and which goes for development professionals at large. And let me tell you something. My own personal experience is when I first joined the job, and I joined the Ministry of Rural Development. My first posting was in a place called it was in a place called Karvi. Karvi is a district in the UP-MP border. It's placed right in between Chambal, and I was placed in a village which was 30 kilometers away from the primary healthcare center. And I was expected to last there, which I did for 6 months. I successfully lasted there. And then I laughed.
You can share your position note that you are
Sorry?
discussing. You can share your job note.
Yes, that's a very interesting job note. So when we had to go through a little, a small refresher training before we went there. And I remember it was a water project. And water tends to be a very political area of work because it's really contentious, especially in drought affected areas. So if you're going to work in Rajasthan, you're working in, these ravine areas of UP and MP, water is a big point of political struggle. And water is the biggest point of caste struggle in that place. And I had no clue. I was fresh out of my post-graduation, and my training was nowhere related to development sector. I was a financial management postgraduate. I had spent the first 6 months working with Maruti Udyog in a really nice swanky office, and I decided to chuck it and join the development sector, and I got through. And in the refresher course, our director HR gave us one instruction, and till date, God be honest, I haven't been able to make out what that instruction meant. What he told us was, do not get kidnapped. And I had actually raised my hand and said, excuse me, sir, how does one manage to do that? Like, how does one manage to not get kidnapped? He was like, you know what, which basically means think on your feet, watch over your shoulders, don't go after sunset. So there was a long list of things we were not allowed to do. And it was tough. So what basically happens is when you're working in the sector, if you're working in communications, if you're working in a reporting team, most of the times you probably will spend in the office. But once in a while, somebody like me will drag you to the field and say, you know what, you expect me to write an entire project in 500 words? Why don't you come with me and see how difficult it is, right? So be prepared that the job is physically challenging. If you really are serious about it, creature comforts are difficult to come by. And let me not scare you. The job allows you to get into the best of the 5-star hotels and sit in a workshop. It allows you to interact with the brightest and the best planners and the academicians and scholars. But if you have to go down to the field, you have to be mentally prepared that it's a very physically challenging job. And going back to the one thing that I said, that we interact with extremely varied kind of stakeholders, you have to be adaptable. I mean, adaptability is a key if you want to work in this sector. Whether you work as a journalist to cover development beat, whether you work internally, you have to be adaptable. It helps if you know more than one language. It really helps to know the local language, if you know English. And I'll come back to language later, and I want to spend a little time on that, but I'll come back to that later. But what I'm trying to say is you have to be adaptable in your communication, because there are times when you would be sitting there wanting to say something, but you have to bite your tongue. And there is no option, right? And there are times when you would go out there and you would have to listen to a community talking, and you probably are looking at just those. And this is my personal experience. I've taken communication experts with me, and they look for some keywords which they can, spin a story around. Those keywords come by after an hour's interaction with the community, because they will insist on telling their story. So you need to be patient, you need to be adaptable, and you need to be prepared for that rigor. And I always say this to not just you, but every young mind who wants to enter the sector, please enter it if you actually feel passionately about it. It's not your, most often than not, it is not your day-to-day job. It's not, at times it is not a 9-to-5 job. There are times when we meet deadlines and we scramble. There are times when, we are in remote areas and we are stuck. So be prepared for all of that. But one part of the rigor, which is specifically for people working on communication management, is be very careful of the information you distill and you put out. Right? Because, we don't work, like, I don't work with stories. My communication manager might be looking for stories, but I don't work with stories. I work with people. And I work with people who are, we work with women, we work with children, we work with the LGBTQI community, we work with the poor, we work with the urban poor, we work with, migrant laborers, we work with a whole range of people who come with their own sensitivities. And it is important that you understand right at the go that you're not dealing with stories, you're dealing with people, and you're trying to tell their stories and you have to do justice to them. And that's very important. Now, when I say do justice to them, I say this because the quality and, the information that you put, the accuracy of information that you put out, you have to be very careful. What comes on WhatsApp is not information. What is there on Wikipedia is not a peer-reviewed information. And trust me, more often than not, a program manager would be able to pick out those keywords, put it through, search it out, and tell you what have you done. Right? And that's very important for you to establish your credibility, because it's a fairly wide group of actors, but it is also a fairly compact sector. We talk to them, right? And hence, the word goes around. So be very careful and do justice to the work that you do. And I can't repeat this enough, and I can't emphasize enough on this, that the information that you put out, where have you taken it from, how have you authenticated it, whom have you passed it through, is very important. Now, the second part of it is, often, a lot of it is not human stories, right? I have had frustrating time with my, communication manager in UNDP, trying to explain to her that a biomass power project, there has to be some point of interest in a biomass power project. And the point is, a biomass power project has no human face to it, right? But then technical information and how do you translate it into a piece which you think is going to become readable is important. And I usually use an anecdote here. And so I remember once we had a project on looking at increasing energy efficiency for, water heating. So a lot of the electricity that is spent is used for thermal needs. So when we were trying to do one pager of the project, and the first draft came back to us, and the first line of that draft read that firewood is used in North India to heat hot water. We had no clue what that meant. And I am sure the person had the best, intention, but a lot was lost between what I was trying to say as a technical expert and what the person was trying to translate from my communication and put it there. So what happens is, a part of it is on people like us, that we try to make it simpler. But, as communication experts, as people who get into media and communication, you have to work on continuously enhancing your knowledge. Do you want to work on energy beat? You have to understand the basics of energy. If you don't, run it through somebody who does. Do you want to work on, gender budgeting? Run it through people who know gender budgeting. Take a little bit, sit down with them, work on it. Do you want to work with children? For heaven's sake, that's the most critical area. Do run it with experts on children. Ask people, can I use this photograph? Am I allowed to use it? And these are very critical things in, communication. Can I use a photograph? Can I put somebody's face there? Am I taking advantage of the position that I am in because I'm in a higher position of power than the poor? All these questions are something you need to prosecute in your head when you want to work in this sector. And these are the skills that the sector demand, no matter where you're working.
I will put out just one stats for the students to find some enthusiasm, and a very recent stats published probably on the BBC also during our research. 80% of non-profits in India responded to the pandemic situation. So whatever that you hear on news, state governments, central governments, this and that, funds coming in, pouring in, it's 80% of the non-profits that have done the job on the field. And as a resident of West Bengal presently, we have seen Amphan very closely and how people have responded much more than the government has, with no offense meant to any government anywhere. But this is the area where young, fresh Indians can just take the plunge and put out the best with the best professional standards. I would now try and request you, Tanushree, to focus on certain UN jobs. You have the YPP, the Young Professionals Program. I think that's around this age when they can apply. What are the kind of experience whether they require it? And after, we'll take that till 5:45 because we are restricted with time, always as always. We will leave the floor open for the students to ask the questions after and see how things shoot back at us.
Okay. Yeah. Let me start with something. I was trying to figure out what do I talk to you, and I was talking to my husband. And the one thing he said is, you speak a language I don't understand. Can you please tell the students what keywords they need to search? Because I have never been able to understand how does one look for a job in development sector. Now, the thing is that the easiest thing I can tell you is, look at websites. World Bank would have its own website. UN has its own website. All of these organizations are mandated by law to put out each opening into the public domain. Right? I have said it before, selections are rigorous. I'm not going to mince words there, but that doesn't mean you can't get it, right? But how do you search for a job? Most of the communication job, if you want to join the development sector, is going to come not in the form of a job advertisement which says a media manager. We use strange keywords. We use keywords like knowledge management experts. We like our, really weighty words here. We ask for documentation officers. We ask for, if we, in a good day, we do ask for communication managers too. And High Commission and embassies do also ask for media managers, but those roles are different. Be very clear. When you're talking about media manager, the role probably is asking for someone who's going to be the bridge between the organization and the external media, right? Looking at networking and all of that. But most of the development sector communication jobs will come to you wrapped as knowledge management jobs. And that's one term I want you to remember. We look for knowledge management experts. We look for, people who can write reports. We look for short-term consultants who can do that for us. And when you look at it, I don't know if you're aware of it. There's this portal called the DevNet Jobs.
Yeah, I think some of the students are. But if you can, please, guys, take a note of that. Yeah, please.
So there's this portal called the DevNet Jobs India. And there's also a DevNet Jobs ORG, which looks at international jobs. And you will find most development sector jobs there, including the UN jobs and other jobs.
And all the media jobs related to development sector are there.
Exactly. And so you will see these keywords there. They would look for knowledge management of officers. They would look for documentation officers. They would look for documentation managers. A lot of them you would find, project communications or program communications. All these jobs in some way or the other are looking for communication experience, right? If you're looking at a large organization, we usually look for someone who has had, say, about a 3 years experience, whether it's in advertising, media, consultancies, 3 years experience of, where you've done something regarding reporting and writing. But another way of but for people, like you who are students or who are undergrads, a lot of these agencies also take in interns, right? They do take internships, and a lot of those internship jobs are to look at, helping the organization document, do stories, set up a website for them. And those internships are also a good way of putting your foot in the door. And why I say this is, if later when you apply for a job and somebody sitting on the other side of the table sees that you have had a short stint with, a similar organization, that adds credibility, right? Which means that I don't have to start with you from the scratch. You know a bit about it. But also alongside that, UN has something called the UN volunteers, the UNV. UNV is for entry level people. UNV poses very interesting and very challenging job opportunities. You can be put in the country office to work on communication. You can be sent on fields. You're attached to government agencies. So UNV is another way that you can look at it, right? And most UNVs go on to do really well later on because, I mean, that tag of UNV is pretty coveted in the sector.
Recently, Tanushree, we have a joke in the journalist circle, which is that's the only job which still has a pension going on. So yeah, guys, UNV is fantastic.
You think you're making me think I should have gone back to the UN? I should have never left it. No, the good thing about UN is, they're pretty open about taking you back. I mean, UN's never a closed door, which is a great thing. I mean, I have to say, I have had those 10 years have been one of the best years of my life working with them. But do look for these keywords. Do understand that this is the language that we speak. So even when you're looking at, if you get called for an interview, if you meet somebody, who's from the development sector and you're trying to, gauge if there are opportunities, it really helps when you use these words. If you tell them that you have an interest in looking at, telling stories, you have an interest in knowledge management, you have an interest in knowing how the organization does its documentation, these are words, as boring as they are, they really capture the imagination of someone like me. I'm sorry. So these are the things you need to look at. As I said, most organizations would have, websites. Large NGOs would have their websites, and these are good starting points, right? But as I said, instead of looking at just the traditional development sector, you should also look at spending, if you can have a stint with, communication consulting agencies, which work directly or indirectly with development sector, because that experience then helps you get into these larger organizations.
One quick word from you: how important is a master's? I mean, the kind of interns that I have come across in the last 4 or 5 years, most of them have had a master's degree. How important is post-graduation for a communication student?
If you're looking at a UN job, if you're looking at a High Commission embassy job, I would say it's very important, right? The chances of you landing a good job in the first 4 years or 5 years of your career is much higher when you have a master's. After that, people start asking about your experience.
Yeah.
That's when your experience trumps your educational qualification. And I'm not, and often it doesn't count. I mean, I have been on interview panels, and trust me, we do look at where have you done your master's from. But at the end of the day, when someone sits in front of me in the table, that person gets judged only by the way the person speaks and presents themselves. And that's why I come back to that point. Do invest in working on yourself, because how well you communicate will tell me how well you can communicate for me. And that's very important.
I mean there can be nothing better sentence to conclude this session for now. Tanushree has actually spelled it out for all of us. I think students got it loud and clear. It depends on your linguistic skills, not just linguistic skills, everything that she had touched upon. And now I leave the floor open for you guys to start shooting your questions. I mean, at your age, I never had this opportunity. Thankfully, we did not have a pandemic. We did not have webinars. But now that we have industry experts, we have our faculties, our deans, our principals, all joining us together. Please start shooting your questions as I put it one by one to Tanushree. So more or less, it's primarily eligibility criteria. So You can break it up into two, undergrads and postgrads, and also talk about journalists in DevCom, or development sector, and YPP for now, before we take the next set of questions.
So I think quite a few of them are actually related. I've spoken briefly about the eligibility criteria of getting into it. The good bad of it is that the development sector can be pretty flexible uh, about about what qualifications you come with. But as I said, at an entry level, we will definitely look at what education you bring on board. Having said that, if you're a student of communication, media, mass communication, that really helps, right? Most large organizations, multilaterals, bilaterals, donor agencies would ask for a master's degree. A lot of them would ask for master's plus 3 years of experience. And that's why I said that, it's good if you can, a lot of us do want to get into the UN at the first go. Nothing wrong with it. But probably the best way of then looking at it is to look at the UN volunteer programs, right? If you can enter it through the volunteer programs, it gives you a certain number of years of experience, and then you move on to look at other opportunities. But even if you have worked with, say, an advertising agency, you have done corporate communications, you have done, you have worked with consultancy agencies, the development sector would take you on board. It really helps if you have worked in some sort of a human story, if you have covered one beat or the other. But, as I said, there is a degree of flexibility that the sector offers. But yes, we do look at your qualification, and it does help if you have if you are conversant in the areas of communications and media and journalism. Yeah. So that's the bit of the...
Yeah. Please go on.
Sorry?
Please go on. Continue.
So the Young Professional Programs is a World Bank program. You would find it at the World Bank's site. It is a pretty transparent way of applying for it. You have to go to their site. They invite applications. You have to fill in your form. You have to submit. As I said, all of these organizations, we are mandated by law that we have to advertise for every position that comes up, because we deal with public money. So if you want to apply for the bank's YPP, please go to the bank's site and do that. As I said, if you want to apply for the UNV, go to the UNDP site or the UN site and do that, right? The process is pretty self-explanatory. The site will take you through it. But the YPP does need some bit of an experience for you to get into it. I think the World Bank YPP asks for about 3 years of experience. Often mid-level managers have better chances of getting into it.
Right. The next set of questions, Deboshi is asking, it would be great if you could discuss the importance of fellowships. That's a good question. Suparna is asking, rising environmental concern and nature, vehemently protesting like never before, with so many campaigns assuming popular practice status. Do you think we are on the right track of conversation?
Sorry, I missed that. I'm sorry.
It's a long question. Given the rising environmental concern and nature, vehemently protesting like never before, and with so many more campaigns assuming popular practice status, do you think we are on the right track of conversation?
Okay, that's interesting. Can I club that with the bit on the gender index?
I will hold you on the gender thing. Okay,
I'm going to first go for the fellowship question.
Yeah.
I'm going to then go on to the question on how can journalists work on the development sector, and then I'm going to go to the questions of environmental concerns and the gender index of rural electrification. Sure. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Yeah. So a lot of I'm not very sure what you mean when you ask what are the importance of fellowships, but a lot of
possible. I think they're asking the possible fellowships, or which are the fellowships they can look at in terms of applications.
So, a lot of these, a lot of high commissions and foreign missions have fellowships which are meant also for young journalists, and also educational fellowships which look at various areas. So, for example, if you look at Australia, one of the largest interactions that we have with India is education, right? And then there are fellowships which Australia offers. There are also exchanges between between different institutions that these high commission and embassies enable through an institutional arrangement, which the students can then take advantage of. Similarly, US has some, Canada has some. I think now an entire ASEAN block of fellowships are there. There is a whole SAARC block of fellowships which are there. You can look at all of these. Most of them would be available in the embassy and high commission websites. A lot of exchange programs are also done by India's own Ministry of External Affairs. They publish it from time to time. Over and above that, there are times when organizations like Oxfam and WWF look for fellows. You have to be on a watch out. All these information would be out there in the public domain. But embassies, high commissions are a good place to start.
Also, the Asian Development Bank, ADB, has fellowships.
So, multilateral. I mean, when I say multilaterals or UN organizations, I have counted the World Bank and ADB within it, right? When I say that, it basically means all the organizations which start with UN plus ILO, WHO, FAO, IFAD, all of them. And of course, the multilateral banks. So you would have, please go to the, they would have a section on careers or how do to work, how to work with us. Within that, you will find these information. And all of these organizations will have that little section on how do you get engaged with them. And you will find the information there. So, and you do find a lot of fellowships which are there, especially in the knowledge space. Talking about how journalists can get into the development sector is something which honestly an editor has to answer you. But what I can tell you is, as someone who is in the development sector, we do want that, the media, the traditional media and also the social media is extremely important for us to tell our stories. It gives us a much wider platform. It does add to our own accountability. And it's a very powerful tool for us for advocacy and sending the right message. And we do want to take advantage of it. At the same time, as I said, if you are a journalist, you go on to become a journalist. If you write even if you have your own blog, you have any of that, you want to do a development story, I would urge you that please be empathetic and please be very careful about what you put out. We do lay a lot of importance on not just the quality of the message, but also on the sanctity of the message that goes out there. And that I think gives me a very neat segue into, are we on the right side of the conversation? Depends on which side you are on. Right? And
you're responding like journalists.
No, I'm responding like a diplomat. You're forgetting that's what I am.
No, but this sounds similar to us. So should we answer that more?
I think depends on which side you are on. And I think, there is a space for all the sides to present what they think. But, and here I'm talking of just the debate and I'm talking of just the conversation. But I will not go on to talk like a diplomat or a journalist for very long, because at the end of the day, I am a development economist and I will hit the nail on the head. And I will say that, especially when you're talking of environment, we are operating within a very small and dangerous window. If you have noticed, we certainly have, in the last year and a half, since the COPs started falling apart, the reporting in media about climate change, energy, renewable energy has substantially reduced. What that does is it erases the issue to a large extent from the mind of the public, and which makes it even more difficult for people like us and also the people who are working in the advocacy space on it to operate. So we need to open up that space for this debate to take place. The discussions on environmental laws, the discussion on environmental safeguards, environmental impact assessments, all of these, we are in a very critical time when we need to talk about this more and more. We need to talk about climate change more and more. We need to talk about how businesses impact climate change. As people who are going to work on media, I would urge you also, it's a good time to talk about how the climate change is ultimately going to affect the businesses, because that's a good start of steering the conversation towards the right direction. And with that, Arjun, I've put it out there. I do think there is a right direction.
I'm not going to add joined us, but we are running out of time. I mean, unlike television where the producer would have chopped me off and gone into commercials, the webinar allows us to continue. So thank you. I have to wrap it up. It was a fascinating session. I have a few takeaways for the students, which is please keep studying, reading a lot, building yourself on that. A master's degree, probably a postgraduate degree, because I keep scaring them by saying, you are a graduate, you sit there, and 4 years down the line, you find the person next to you with a postgrad degree getting much more bonus or increment than you. You will be biting your nails. So the world has changed. We all need to strive for higher studies. We all need to understand how linguistic priorities have to be. In fact, empathy is the word, as you pointed out. I once again thank our principal, Professor Banerjee, and our dean, without whose support this wouldn't have happened, Dr. Bakshi, for being there with us. We have to wrap up the session. Thank you, Tanushree, so much. I'll leave it on Chandrima now.
Thank you, sir, and Ms. Bhowmik for the fascinating session. I'm sure it has been an eye-opener for many of us. We thank you, Mrs. Tanushree Bhowmik, for that excellent presentation and your time. Hopefully, you won't mind if we ever reach out to you for more knowledge and assistance, as we evolve as students and make that plunge into the professional world. Ma'am, it was an honor and privilege to have you with us. I wish to thank our Dean, Dr. Bakshi, and our Principal of the Heritage Academy, Professor Gaur Banerjee, for supporting us. We also wish to thank our dear faculty members, Professor Arjun Chatterjee, Professor Banali Ray, and Tamal Sir for their continuous inspiration, and our classmate Saptarshi Datta for his kind support. It's time for my senior Neha Kaur and myself, Chandrama Sen, to sign off. Thank you, stay safe and stay well.